In this video, we're going to see how to tell a remember function to forget its value and recompute when an object changes. Consider this scenario. We have a user interface with a spinner or a drop-down on the top, and that spinner has a collection of some type of object. In our case, it's a series of specimen objects. So currently, we can pick an object from the spinner. I created all that in a previous series of videos. What we want to do is populate this compose layout in all of these outline text fields with the values that come from the object that we selected in the spinner. So let's jump right in and take a look. Our spinner component, or our drop-down component, has an onClick function that is saving whatever object or specimen the user selected into this selected specimen variable. Let's look at where this is defined. It's currently defined at the top as just a normal specimen. But let's change this around a little bit. Let's add by and then mutable state of, then initialize it to a new specimen. This is important because when it's a state object, it's something that Compose can pay attention to. A composable wants to watch something and notice if it changes. Let's pass that object in to specimen facts. Specimen facts is where we initialize our compose look and feel. It's within the set content section of the onCreate function of this activity. By passing it in, we're telling Compose that we want to pay attention to this item and we want to listen for changes to it. Of course, we'll need to update the signature of specimen facts. Note that the type is specimen type. So by using that by operator, we're actually getting back a specimen type, not a mutable state type. That mutable state is essentially what we are delegating to by using the delegator pattern. So now we have selected specimen, and we know that we're giving it a default, but that will be essentially overwritten when we're calling down to this function and we're passing in the specimen that we declared up above. So it's likely never going to actually need this default value, but I put it in there because I like doing that anytime I change a function signature and add a new parameter in case that was called somewhere else. Now we can get a bit more specific here in our mutable state of. Currently we're initializing it to empty string for each of these items. But the reality is that an empty specimen, a specimen that doesn't have anything in it, all of those items are going to be empty string anyway. So let's go ahead and simply use the properties from our selected specimen. What's the value of passing these in as properties if we know that a remember is only going to be computed the very first time we compose? And at that point, we likely haven't picked anything from the drop-down anyway, so these are all just going to be empty string. Well, what we want to do is tell the remember that it needs to forget at a specific time. Well, there's another parameter that we can pass into remember, and it's a key. And every time we call remember, we'll call it with a key if we've done it that way. And if that key stays the same, remember will not recalculate the value. But if that key changes, remember will recalculate the value. So that's a good way to essentially force or request a recomputation of something that's been remembered. Otherwise, remember would not recompute the value on each time we do a recomposition. Now, remember is actually a function. And there's a trick with Kotlin, especially with high order functions, where we can pass in a lambda like so. But if that lambda happens to be the last parameter, then what we can do is simply put the lambda after the function call. And it saves us a bit of typing. It just kind of is a funny syntax if you don't know what's going on here. Because you see this word remember, and then you see open and close curly. What you don't realize is that this is actually a function that's getting passed to the high order function called remember. Now, there are other parameters that we can pass to remember, including a key. So let's use the selected specimen ID as that key, and that's going to make a lot of sense because that specimen ID is something that's unique from one specimen to another. So if we have chosen a different specimen, then that specimen ID is going to change and we need to recompute that remember. I bring this up in the debugger, and at this point we look pretty good. Note when I switch from the Eastern Himalayan fir at Crosley Hall to the Eastern Redbud at Yeatman's Cove Sawyer Point Park, note that our values change. And once again, I can change to Red Maple at Teachers Dyer Hall, University of Cincinnati, and our values change here. There is one field I'm missing though, and that's this plant name, which we know is an autocomplete. So we do need to go ahead and pass our specimen to that. That's this text field with drop-down usage here. So let me add one more parameter. And we'll navigate up to this composable and add the parameter here as well. And now, in this text field value, we simply pass in the plant name from our selected specimen. Now, our same trick from before applies. We need to pass in a unique identifier or a key to this remember function to tell it when to recompute. Just as before, we'll use selected specimen.specimen ID. One subtle change I notice, I am using the default for this take, which is the number of autocomplete suggestions it gives us. So this call down here is redlining. There are a couple ways that I can do it. I can specify that this is selected specimen by using that property name directly, and that's probably the best way to do it because that gives us a bit of documentation. I'll also need to provide a property name for the string resource here. So I need to give a property name for each of these, and then my red line goes away. So remember, data in, label, selected specimen, and if I click on this call, we see data in, label, and all the way to the right, selected specimen. The other option is I could take this one parameter I'm not populating and move it to the end of this function signature, but really using those parameter names when I'm calling the function is the cleanest way to do it. Now I redeploy, and let's see what happens when I select a specimen. Notice Eastern Redbud Yeatman's Cove at Sawyer Point Park appears. Description and date planted are not populated for that particular specimen. But we can go to another one and we see that sure enough, Red Maple is the plant name, and that updates as we would expect. University of Cincinnati, Teachers Dyer Hall, a lovely plant, November 1998. And then our Eastern Himalayan fir, once again, all of the fields update as we would expect. And they're all still editable if we want to change anything. So in this video, we've seen how to trigger remember to forget a value and recompute the value when an object changes. I think this is a very useful concept because there are a lot of times when we create a screen and we want to show values from different objects and allow the user to choose different objects and see those details. So as always, I hope this video was helpful, and I look forward to reading your comments. Thank you.